Here's the thing, you see all these builders use different block palettes, but when you try to make your own, it doesn't look good. So you end up going back to the same palette you always use. But what if I told you there's one trick pro builders know that allows them to make any block palette they want, and they look good every single time? So let's talk about color theory. Most people think that color theory is this super complicated thing that only pro artists know, but honestly it's super simple, and it's how most of your favorite builders make their builds look so good. The first step to creating any block palette is picking your base block. There's 3 things to consider when you're doing this. 1. Pick the mood or theme for your build. For example, you can make a build feel cozy if you use oak planks and terracotta. These are warm colors so they feel cozy. If you're building a modern house, you can choose quartz or concrete, and if you want it to feel natural, use stone or mossy blocks. If you can't figure out a theme for your build, look at other ones and figure out which blocks are your favorite. Using this strategy, you can make a block palette using any block in the game, so don't be scared to try and use some weird blocks. I even recommend you try to use some weird blocks like purpur, because using these weird blocks is going to force you to try new things, and that's exactly how you get better at building in Minecraft. So try to force yourself to use the weird block sometimes, even if it might not end up looking the best. For step 2, we want to test our block in different biomes. If you already know where you want to build, that's great. Just take your base block and try to figure out if it contrasts against the terrain or if it blends into it. In general, you want to find a good middle point where it sticks out from the biome, but not too much that it feels out of place. For example, if I'm building in a snowy biome, I wouldn't build out of snow because you can't even see the house. If you have no idea where to build, then try to use your base block in different biomes. You can then decide where it looks the best and build off from there. The biome you choose can also affect the mood of your build, so keep that in mind when you're deciding where to build. Now we know what base block we want to use, but for step 3, there's one last thing we need to check, and that's the shape. Some blocks have stairs, slabs, and walls, but some others don't. So you need to know exactly what kind of shape you want to build, because if you're gonna need stairs and slabs, then you want to make sure you have a block that has those variants. If you're planning to use your base color as the roof, then you might want to make sure there's stairs. But don't worry about this too much, because as you can see, full blocks can look just as good as stairs and slabs. So after following this 3-step process, we have a base block, and we can start building our block palette around it. But how do we find blocks that look good together? Well, we can use 2 tools. The first being the color wheel. Here's how it works. It has 3 parameters: hue, which is basically just the color; saturation, which is the intensity of that color; and brightness, which is just how light or dark the color is. You can change these parameters to make any color you want, and then the color wheel gives you a code. This is the code that represents your color. But why is this even useful in Minecraft? Well, blocks in Minecraft have colors. Multiple colors, right? Well, no, not really. When you look at a block from far away, it loses its detail and turns into one solid color. And this is exactly how we're gonna take a block to a color and a color to a block. So using this tool, we can basically place blocks on the color wheel. You just have to determine the color of the block and find it on the color wheel. To do this, just build a really big rectangle, fill it in with your base block, and then look at it from far away. Move back until you can't see any more texture in the block anymore, and that's your color, so try to take it and match it on the color wheel. Or you can also use the hex code to get a perfect match. To do this, you can go on a website like blockcolors.app, find the block you want, and the website gives you the hex code right here. But after you found where your block is on the color wheel, we can use this color to find blocks that will pop or blend nicely together with the base block. So you can take your chosen block and find its color. Now we're gonna place that block on the color wheel, and the colors opposite to it are called complementary colors. They contrast each other, and it's gonna make our base color pop. We can also split the opposite side into 2, and now we have what is called a split complementary color scheme. This just gives you more blocks to work with on your build, and it looks more smooth. But if we take colors close to our base block instead, then we have what is called an analogous color theme, and these colors will just look great with your main block. You can even make the range smaller to the point that you're only changing the block based on saturation. Then there's also a triadic color scheme, which is 3 colors evenly separated in the shape of a triangle. And this is where the classic red, yellow, and blue color scheme comes from. A tetradic color scheme mixes 2 different complementary ones. This way you have 2 colors that mix well together, but also 2 other colors that contrast them. And it's the same color scheme these builds use. Monochromatic is using one single color and only changing the brightness like this. And this color scheme usually gets mixed up with achromatic, but the difference is that achromatic schemes go from white to black, but a monochromatic one goes from white to black with a mixture of color in the middle. And these 6 color schemes are going to be the ones we use to make our block palettes. But be careful, because you don't want to use 3 to 5 different blocks, because then it'll start to look too busy. But now we can take these different color schemes that we know will work together, bring them into Minecraft the same way we brought them into color, and we can make our builds look beautiful. But where do you use which block? You know which ones to use, but where and how are you supposed to use them? Well, to not end up with a build that looks like this, let me show you a couple different ways that you can use your blocks. First, you can make pillars. Use specific blocks to make pillars on each corner of the house, then use another for the walls and one for the roof. Or you can make trims around the house like this. I recommend you go on Pinterest and find pictures of houses people have built. You'll see how they use their blocks, and from there you can take inspiration and use your blocks in a similar way. For example, I like how this build uses wood beams in the wall, so I can take my color palette and do something similar. And you can get all kinds of similar patterns and different ways to use your blocks just by taking inspiration online. But keep in mind that the pattern you choose is just as important as the colors you choose, because the wrong pattern can ruin a build. You might realize that one block doesn't look great for the roof, but maybe it looks great on a wall. So in that case, use your block in the right place to make it look good. And like I just did, if you don't know what blocks look good where, then just try it. Build your house like you think it might look good, and if it doesn't, try to build it again until it looks good. After that, you might think we're done, but no, because the block palette affects the blocks but also the details. If we want our details to pop, we can use vibrant and complementary colors, but if we want them to accent the build, we can choose black or white. You need to make sure every detail works with the build, because the details can make a build look worse if they don't fit in. As an example, if I'm building a red house, I wouldn't use a lot of red detail. This would make it look too red and it would feel like a big mess. Instead, I might go for a green bush or leaves, and these are complementary colors to red, so they look good together. Okay, so there's obviously a lot of information to keep in mind when choosing your block palette. So what I recommend you do is find a color palette you like online, use them, practice using them, and figure out why you like those block palettes so much. After that, you can decide which blocks are your favorite and build a block palette around it using the tricks in this video. Just to give you some ideas, here are some of my favorite block palettes. Some of these use complementary colors, others use analogous color themes, and there's a bunch more that follow the color schemes I showed in this video. By the way, if you want all these block palettes, I'll have a link in the description to over 100 block palettes you can use or take inspiration from, and they all use the techniques I showed in this video, except you don't have to do the hard work. Okay, I'll be honest, I get it. It's not easy to make block palettes yourself, but let me show you exactly how I do it for my own builds. And if you copy me, you'll be able to make your own block palettes by yourself. So I'm gonna show you one of my favorite block palettes and how I made it. It uses a mix of yellow, orange, and brown, and for this one I started with acacia planks. Then I figured out what color it was, I placed it on the color wheel, and now we have to decide what kind of color scheme we want. For this palette, I decided to use the colors that were close to yellow. That means we're going with an analogous color theme. So I have my original color, which is orange, and now I'm gonna choose yellow, which is right beside it. And instead of using red as my other color, I decided to just drop the saturation a little bit, and now we have brown. I did this because I know that brown looks good with pretty much everything, and that's just something you learn over time. But now we have our block palette, but it's not a lot of blocks to work with, so we can add some similar ones to add some variety. And if we try this on a build, it looks pretty good. You can also see I used my brown blocks as a foundation, and then I'm doing this kind of stripe pattern with the beehives and yellow wool, and this is just one of the ways you can make a pattern on your build. But then my details are all colors that work with the colors of the build, and everything just works together. So that's basically how I make my own block palettes. Go back and you can do this with all the color themes I showed in this video, but just keep in mind that this takes a bit of practice, so keep trying new combinations and eventually you'll have something that looks pretty good. This is the exact same strategy pro builders use to make their block palettes look beautiful, so hopefully it was useful and you learned something new. But with that, have a great rest of your day.